So, welcome. My name is Jonathan Neal. I am the director of the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University. And I am very pleased to welcome to our Los Angeles in the Age of Corona conversation, Eric M. Hanks. Eric is the founder, the owner, and the director of the M. Hanks Gallery, which since 1988 has specialized in African American art from the 19th century to today. He is a fine art appraiser as well as an educator, probably an expert in the history of African American art and American art since the middle of the 19th century. And since 2013, he has been a commissioner with the LA County Arts Commission and now serves as its president. So we're very pleased to welcome Eric Hanks to our conversation today. And I have to present an apology because when we first recorded this, I made that exact same introduction and had yet to press record on our Zoom call here. So as soon as I am done talking, you will have a brief pause and it will go into the very beginning of our conversation. But I apologize for cutting off just the briefest of the beginning responses from our guest. And so apologies to you, the audience, and apologies to Eric for my oversight and lack of technical prowess in managing Zoom. I guess we are not all experts as we once thought they were. So please enjoy my conversation with Eric and join us for one of our next LA in the Age of Corona conversations, where I promise I will make sure that we are recording from the beginning. Thank you. How about the gallery? The sort of, I assume, is one of the main activities that you've been involved in. How has this transformed what you've been doing at the gallery and the business practices that you would otherwise have been involved in that have now all undoubtedly had to have changed?
Oh yeah, so absolutely we had to change. Sort of gone are the days, at least for a little while, where people would just come in and casually look around, ask questions, and so forth. So that has kind of ended, at least temporarily. I've been doing a lot of what we're doing now, sometimes Zoom calls and meetings and so forth like that. And I do have to say, though, there's definitely been a noticeable difference. It's not just because of the health issues, but the economy as well. So business activity has slowed. That's noticeable. And all the articles I'm reading are saying, and me talking to some of my colleagues indicate the same thing. Of course, people are most concerned about their health
Right.
and also their financial health. So art purchases, anyway, are probably low, at least on many people's priority list.
Yeah, it's a reality check to go down the list of the things that are most essential, and sometimes you have to face the reality that as much as being in the arts, we are fully committed to them and understand their essential place within our society. It's not always the case, especially when these kinds of crises come rolling along, that we can expect that other people will take on that state of mind.
Oh no, absolutely. I do have to say, though, I get a lot of questions. There's been a lot of interaction. So I think a lot of people being at home are kind of delving into the topic. So in that sense, it's a good thing. That's one of the good things, I think. People are digging in a little deeper, asking questions and looking at art online. And that's been a good thing.
Can you give us a little bit more perspective on your history of art dealing in Los Angeles, particularly for African American art since the 1980s? I mean, you've been through a number of ups and downs within the broader market. So I suspect that not that anybody could have expected that this was going to be the next crisis that we were going to face. But I'm just curious to sort of hear your take on the history of particularly the market in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so when I started in 1988, I was very fortunate to have Elizabeth Catlett, who had a good reputation then and now, of course, and so that helped me kind of get a good start. I was located in Santa Monica, which had at the time a 4% Black population. A lot of people thought I was crazy to open up a gallery that specialized in African American art. And then, of course, the West Coast, not as known for arts as, say, New York City. So that was another thing. But despite all of that, it was kind of slow in the beginning because people needed to get to know and trust me as a dealer. Even with Elizabeth Catlett as my first exhibiting artist, I still had to overcome a lot of that, and that's understandable, and I expected it. And over the years, though, another thing that's happened, is like in the late '80s, it was beginning to turn around the overall feeling about African American art. Some people felt like it shouldn't even be isolated as a category, for instance, and then others kind of looked down on it. As I think the two sometimes were related, sometimes not, but it wasn't something worthy of any attention, let alone any kind of museum exhibits and so forth. But a lot of that has changed quite a bit over the years. Solo exhibits featuring Black artists have proliferated, starting in various major museums. They've been adding those museums, mainstream museums, have been adding the pieces to their collection,
For sure.
permanent collections and stuff like that. So that's been great. So I've seen the evolution of interest over the years. It's really been increasing, and it's not limited to African American investors. People of all backgrounds are starting to turn their attention in that direction. So that's been a good thing.
When you began in 1988, what was kind of the impetus for opening the gallery itself versus, say, doing this as maybe more along as an independent dealer, right? What was the driving force behind wanting a little bit more of a public face at that moment?
That's a good question, and thank you, because I was listening to a lot of the artists and reading about some of their complaints, the lack of commercial gallery exhibitions. And when they did arise, oftentimes the pieces were, they felt, not really respectfully presented. So they were too crowded together too much. There was no real theme a lot of times when they were shown and stuff. And so I had the idea of not just being a dealer, but also having a venue that would be a respectful place that would showcase the works in a way that would make the artist happy, of course, make me happy as well, and give the proper due to those artists. They had paid a lot of dues and spent a lot of time and spend their lives creating these wonderful pieces. I thought they deserved a space, and I kind of looked at my gallery as almost like a temple where people could come in, and obviously there was a commercial aspect, I'm not going to deny that, but at the same time I wanted it to be a special place.
And was that one of the rationales behind opening in Santa Monica?
Yes, I mean, I knew some folks in Santa Monica as well. And as quiet as it's kept, by the way, the Museum of African American Art, that's the one that now is in the May Company, I believe. It's not the California African American Museum.
Right.
They were actually in Santa Monica before they were in Los Angeles. And so I kind of I liked Santa Monica as a place. And I just thought it'd be a good spot to start. And I just got lucky. It was funny because the space I was in was a small space. It used to be, before I moved into it, a jewelry store. And I had to get rid of this big, thick pile of carpeting, I remember, and make some changes to it. But it was a quaint spot that I really liked it a lot. It was a good way to get started.
And so can you paint a picture of the atmosphere at that moment in the late 80s and the early 90s? Where was the interest coming from? Was it primarily African American collectors in California, or did you have other people who were interested? Was it mostly LA based collectors and individuals, or were you seeing others coming in from other cities and other places who kind of knew that you were here and knew that you were specializing in this work and began to provide more traction in the space?
Yeah, so there were quite a few California collectors that were patronizing the gallery in the beginning, but there were also several across the country. Early on, I picked up a collector in Atlanta, for instance, who turned out to be one of my most loyal and biggest clients. And so quite a few, and then of course, she helped to spread the word in Atlanta, and the word got around to various places throughout the country. So I always had a wide geographical base, even though my gallery was physically located in Santa Monica.
Interesting. And I'm also curious, what was the tenor like? I mean, I know Los Angeles has had a fairly challenged history with regard to race relations, particularly in the late 80s and the early 90s. And as I recall, a lot of attention is paid to a Whitney biennial from 1992, 1993, which was one of the first that kind of brought a lot of the, I would say, a sort of a new phase of race consciousness or racial consciousness into the art world. What did that all look like from your perspective, working here on the West Coast and already being engaged with these artists in this field?
You mean you mean the fact that they sort of started focusing on that?
Yeah. That there seemed to be, I mean, I think throughout the 80s, there was sort of growing attention being paid, but as I recall, it was sort of by the late 80s and the early 90s it kind of finally was making its way into some major institutions, and you had a lot more attention that was being paid to sort of younger generations of African American artists in particular. I'm thinking of, for example, Glenn Ligon and Kara Walker and others who really made their name at that moment.
Yeah, I regarded it as a very positive development. I like the idea. I mean, to just feature those artists and give them their due and expose them. I think as a society in general, we all benefit. It's not just the benefiting the Black American community, but I think everybody can benefit from being exposed to those artists and what it is that they're trying to say with their work. So I regarded it as a very good and positive development that only helped me in my efforts. I really appreciated it.
Um, so what are some, not bringing it back to the present a little bit, I'm just sort of curious, given you've got, it's always enjoyable for me to talk to people who have a purchase on the LA scene going back some years, especially for the 80s and the 1990s. But this is a conversation series that's really meant to be about today.
Yeah, sure.
What are you seeing amongst colleagues, amongst artists, amongst collectors, that on the one hand you find concerning, and we already talked about sort of the financial pressures that people have, but what might you be optimistic about? What are some of the things that maybe you've been seeing, or the conversations that you're having that give a sense of what this might look like when we come out the other side of this pandemic?
Oh, I'm very optimistic actually, just because over the years and just now, I mean, even now, there's all these different, like Soul of a Nation, just as a concrete example. That exhibit, of course, it originated at the Tate in London, but it started at the Crystal Bridges Museum,
Right.
and moved around the country. That, for example, drew a lot of attention, and I just thought it was a very good thing. A lot of people got to see it, and I subscribed to the art newspaper. They put out exhibits and attendance and so forth, and I was really happy to see it wasn't in the top 10, but you had to be in the millions to get there. But it was definitely listed, and it was very popular. A lot of people saw that show at all the different venues, at most of the different venues anyway. And so to me, that's just a very good thing. People are opening up their minds and their hearts, and they have the opportunity to see these works. I think it's a very positive development.
So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. What do you think about the fact that it was the Broad Museum that was able to bring that exhibition to Los Angeles? I mean, not that there's anything wrong with the Broad, but I think for a lot of people, it's something like a private museum. It's there to feature Eli Broad's, private collection and sort of
Yeah.
take, at least for the upstairs. But I actually, I mean, I found it very encouraging that this was a place that was going to bring that show to Los Angeles, where you've got other fairly august institutions, whether it be the Hammer, which does some great shows, the MoCA,
Oh, yeah.
LACMA, exactly. What are your thoughts on on the context in which that show showed up here in LA?
I was like you. I was very optimistic. I was very pleased. I have to say, they actually asked me. They did something I thought was really kind of cool, not just because they asked me, but they asked other folks as well to do like little guided tours of sections of the show. So I did one. An artist friend of mine named Phoebe Beasley did one. And the way they handled it, I thought, was very positive and sensitive. I just thought they really did a good job of putting that on. And the fact that it was there, in a major museum downtown Los Angeles, I just saw nothing but positive come out of it, and I just really appreciated everything they did to try to enhance the experience for anybody interested in that show and in the work in general. I just talked to them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was an exceptional show. I thought it was especially for some of the more undiscovered artists who were there, and some of the graphic work. And I mean, it was really a fantastic show. And so, my hope is that we see more like that at more of the institutions around the both, just not just in Los Angeles, but around the country.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think it's a good thing.
What from your perspective now as an arts commissioner? I think that a lot of people know about this in Los Angeles, but I think many people also may just have no idea what it is that the arts commissioner is actually, what their role is with regard to the LA County Arts Commission, which a lot of people hear about and see the programs they put on. So give us a little background on what exactly the commissioners are responsible for doing.
Okay, well, first of all, the LA County Arts Commission obviously deals with LA County, and in LA County there are five county supervisors. Each one of the five county supervisors can appoint three arts commissioners. So there's a total of 15 commissioners on the commission, and each one representing each one of the three representing the different districts. So that's the first thing. And but there are people that actually, and we're not paid. It's all a volunteer kind of thing.
Sure.
But there are paid employees who work hard, by the way, to do everything that has to be done to help promote the arts. So one of the roles, of course, is to promote the arts in LA County. That's one thing. Also, we help to, there's a certain amount of the budget in LA County that gets allotted to organizations in the form of grants and so forth. So our role is to help make sure that takes place in a fair way, spread across not just the big organizations, but the smaller ones as well. And throughout all the arts, it's not just visual arts, it's theater arts, it's music, etc., all the rest. So that's another function. And then there's the civic art function where, you go to a hospital, there's murals maybe in the hospital that the county administers and so forth. So there's that civic art function. And so, but the main thing is just essentially promoting the arts. We all know that, especially now in a time of crisis, a lot of times, the arts, it's almost like as a society, we have this like love-hate relationship. I don't know if love-hate is the right way to put it, but I don't know. It's like the first thing to go in schools, for instance, when there's tight school budgets, is to get rid of the arts and just focus on math. And I understand the idea of it. It's more practical to have those kinds of skills, but there's also a practical side to the arts as well, I have to say. I mean, creativity. I always think about, Albert Einstein. He kept talking about the importance of imagination, and he used his imagination to kind of break new ground in science. And people tell me that's the same thing can be done in business. So I always like to point out that there's a role for creativity in just about every field. It doesn't just have to be limited to the arts. So I think the arts help to open that up, and that's why it's important. And that's why I think the county, by the way, we're the LA County Arts Commission, the 15 members that were appointed, but it's also now been elevated to a department. So it's the LA County Arts Department. Those are the hardworking folks, the executive director, Kristen Sokoto over there, and all of her team. They're doing a wonderful job. I just want to take a minute to sing their praises. They're working hard to promote the arts and to make sure everything functions properly.
Oh, absolutely. We're big fans. In a different age, we ran a panel discussion, I think back at the beginning of our last semester, where Kristen was one of our panelists talking about the arts in Los Angeles, and this was obviously pre-pandemic. But the Department of Research and Evaluation is very generous to us by lending us, hint, hint, Bronwyn Malden, who runs that department, and she teaches in our program, and she's fantastic on the research and evaluation side.
Brahman is awesome. You bring her up because in the last two meetings we just had, she played a role in informing us of some of the things that she was working on, and so she's totally awesome.
Yes, I 100% agree. She's been teaching our students research and evaluation skills now for quite a while, and we're very, very pleased with it, and it's something the students are often pleased to have too. And also someone who's been very game to figure out how to do this whole transition to online and figure out what it means to try and deliver the same level of education and the same type of experiences, but now over Zoom.
Yeah, right.
The same way we're doing this.
Exactly. It's incredible.
And I can't even imagine what it's like from the county standpoint, where also all of the county employees are also, I can't remember what the exact term is, but um, classified as kind of emergency workers, right? Like emergency
Oh,
reserve workers, where they can be called up from their roles to man the front lines in one way or
oh,
another.
we within the arts county arts department, there's a couple that are dedicated to just that, just as you mentioned.
Yeah, no, so it's fantastic. So we're big shout out to our colleagues at the county commission, in the arts and cultural sector. Um, what do you think is going to happen to our arts and cultural sector? What are your either estimations, prognostications? What are your feelings going forward from this?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, things are probably, even after this crisis is over, we'll probably have to change a little bit. Everybody's going to be conscious about social distancing and that kind of thing. And probably all of the public venues will have to adjust, I'm guessing. I'm hoping that all the different places will resume operations and get back as close to normal as possible as soon as possible. But obviously, the main concern is to make sure everybody's safe first. I'm very optimistic, though. I think one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, even though, like I said, the economy and so forth is to the point where maybe sales aren't as robust as they might have been, I still think, though, the interest is increasing. I think people have more time, and I'm hoping that they're spending that time delving in. That's been my experience. I don't know if I can project that out onto the entire county or to the population at large, but in my experience, there's people are reading more, they're exploring more, they're looking online at the art maybe they wouldn't have looked at, that kind of thing. So I think in that sense, hopefully people will emerge from this feeling a little more connected to the arts. One of the things that I remember, like in Italy, they were talking about how, and they showed on the news, people singing and so forth to kind of help deal with their severe lockdown situation. And to me, that was like an example, as a friend once told me, music as medicine kind of a thing. And that, to me, that was kind of an example of that. People using the arts in a way to cope with the severe lockdown situation. I use that just as an example to say that perhaps people are also using different forms of the arts to do the same. My sister, she's actually an artist. I have a younger sister. I've always been envious of this, of her. She's always the art. I'm really more of the art business person, but she's the artist. And she was actually telling me how she's been spending more time. She's under lockdown, and so she's spending more time with her own art. And there's people, I think, that wouldn't consider themselves as artists or are not putting themselves out there as commercial artists. But I'm guessing, I have another friend who like sews a lot, and they're starting to focus more. So I'm bringing all this up. These are all anecdotal, so I don't know how relevant it is at large. But I still think that people are finding that the arts can actually help you in tough situations. And maybe at the end of all of this, they'll have a new desire, a new appreciation of what the other artists are doing, and they'll maybe look to explore and find out what those things are. Going to museums, looking at plays, etc.
No, I think that's. I certainly have spoken to other artists who have similar senses, where they've had a little bit more time to reflect, a little bit more time to work. Other people are sort of picking up some old projects or things that they might not have had time to do. I feel like I'm busier than ever, so there are a stack of books that I thought I was going to get to read that just are never going to get written. It's just not going to happen. What do you hope gets left behind? Right. I mean, I think that there's if there is a pre-global pandemic moment and a post-global pandemic moment, what are some of the things that you feel like you could do without, which were sort of part of the landscape a few months ago, which have either been put on hold or have the possibility of disappearing, and that you hope don't return when we all do try to get back to what we were doing before?
Oh, that's a good question. One of the things that first jumps in my mind and is, to the extent that it existed, this sort of prejudiced idea about certain art forms and artists and so forth. What I'm hoping that we can leave behind is any preconceived notions before we even actually get to explore whatever the art is. So I guess if there was anything that we could do without, I think it's just is that closed-mindedness. I just hope that one of the things that comes out of all of this is a more open-minded approach to, and not just along racial lines either. I mean, just across the
Sure,
board.
sure.
Across the board, just give it a shot before you make up your mind that you don't like it. Give it a shot and see what it, see what it's like.
Yeah, let's hope. It does. It is an interesting moment because when these sort of external events, this one's hard to sort of describe as an event, given that it's been such a long period now, right? It's like it doesn't have this punctual thing to it. But when these external conditions take root, it does open up all these new possibilities, right? I mean, the ways that people had thought, the kinds of relationships they've had, the kinds of things they thought were possible, not possible, all of a sudden get swept away. And it's just, you've got to try new things. You've got to engage new activities. You've got to kind of do away with all those preconceptions, because necessity just puts itself forward as saying we have to try something different,
Yeah,
regardless of sort of how it's going to be perceived. And
yeah,
that's there's a if that's one thing that I hope I would want to see brought forward with us, right? I mean, it's like it's a kind of, there's a kind of liberating thing that happens in the midst of this crisis, which sometimes cynically they refer to as like, don't let any good crisis go to waste, right? But it's like, and so you always get this vision of kind of like, evil doers who are trying to take advantage. But the flip side of that is that there really is a kind of opening onto new possibilities, right? Which inevitably means leaving behind the old possibilities and the old ways of thinking.
exactly, exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that would be a wonderful outcome of all
Although
this.
I'm also concerned that given all the time that we're spending in front of screens, that the video artists who are having such a hard time getting their work out there anyway are still gonna have an increasingly hard time. Although if this really continues, I think we're all going to be investing in much bigger screens and much better audio visual capabilities, and so maybe there'll be something very interesting to come out of that.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Right?
Absolutely.
I wouldn't, it's like this might be the ideal environment for a video artist.
Yeah,
Um, have you seen or come across any other either innovations or interesting programmings or things that other artists or institutions or players within the field here in LA or beyond have been doing that you found particularly engaging? How have you been sort of occupying yourself, given the need to social distance and just engage with things online?
Well, it's funny. I'm like an old school person. I never really was big on social media, for instance. And for me personally, I've now delved into it a little bit more. My daughter has been just cracking the whip and just teasing the heck out of me for kind of like being a dinosaur. So for me personally, I just now started using Facebook more, and I got my gallery up there finally. And so that's one thing for me. I don't know about others, but I know for me that was kind of a big step.
Sure.
And I'm just noticing there's all these different groups that it's like opening up a world. For me at least. I mean, I'm just now seeing it for the first time. Collecting groups, for instance, and
Sure.
I also obviously is connection with what I do. I collect African American art books, and so I see there's like a group that's all they do and talk about. And I've learned about books I'd never even heard of before, and now I'm on the hunt to see if I can find some of the rarer ones, and lucky enough to find some of the other ones. So that's one thing.
Yeah, and so this is exactly one of those examples where something that you've thought before you could have done without, or largely would have sort of just taken up time from your other sort of well spent moments in your day. Now on social media, discovering new communities and new connections, and learning something that you didn't know.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's one of the things I'm going to take away from this experience.
That's good. Well, it sounds like you're doing it much better than most people are, because I feel like a lot of people are heading down rabbit holes of just like endless Netflix binging and other things like that.
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah, right, right. I,
So I'm curious as well, like from an institutional standpoint, the museums, the arts organizations, the kind of infrastructure in Los Angeles, what are some of the things that you think, in your opinion, need to happen in sort of the near term and the middle term in order to sort of ensure that that LA's infrastructure emerges from this shutdown period, at least intact? I'm sure there's going to be some fallout. There's going to be some damage. There's going to be some difficulties. But what are some of the things that you see, or you would like to see institutions doing in order to sort of maintain and keep going for the future?
Well, obviously, it's going to be a very big challenge for the institutions, even the well-funded ones and the ones that have been around for a long time. I've been reading about how, because they've been forced to shut down, their revenue streams are being shut off. They're furloughing and laying off employees, and talking about, in some cases, using acquisition funds to meet operating expenses and that kind of thing.
What do you think about
So,
that? I'm curious, since you bring it up, what do you think about that?
well, it saddens me that they have to do that. And again, I sympathize with them. They actually have to exist. I know it's not for me to judge how they spend their money, but I mean, I would have hoped, not just because I'm a dealer and I sell to some of these museums, and so that's like a very close connection for me.
Sure.
But just in general, I mean, it's nice that they're able to build their collections and then share that with the public, develop scholarship around it, and in many cases help preserve the works. I mean, the museums provide so many wonderful functions that I think just get overlooked or taken for granted. And so I just hope that all of them are able to emerge from this, at least so that, as you say, they can still remain open and intact. But I realize too that there's going to be some, they're not going to emerge unscathed, all of them, I'm guessing. So I'm just hoping that that they're able to figure out a way to, if they have to use those acquisition funds, to figure out a way to replenish that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's because that was something that when it came up, that's a good example for me of one of a kind of liberating moment, right? It's done out of necessity. A lot of these organizations need access to funds which are otherwise, because of their nonprofit status and because of the way that these things have been donated, and because of, frankly, the organizational ethical rules that keep museum directors and others from using those funds for operational activities. But it's exactly the pandemic which forces those organizations to rethink some of those ethical rules, not in perpetuity. Obviously there's a kind of window that they put around this for museum directors to be able to make those choices.
right.
But I think I'm part of a minority of opinion that thinks that those rules needed to be relaxed much more and much earlier, because there is the capacity for a lot of these institutions to utilize their collections and the value of their collections in ways that could better benefit the public and education and scholarship and all these other kinds of things, even when there aren't immediate operational requirements
Right.
or necessities. And I get beaten back on that endlessly, because the idea is that, well, then people aren't going to donate works to museums, because the whole point is for those things to be put into the collections and to go on in perpetuity. And I understand all that, but it's a consensus cultural thing, right? And so if you can begin to shift that consensus a little bit, and I'm not saying that we want to have fire sales every 3 months out of the basement of the Los Angeles County Museum, but it's like, there's got to be some capacity to, say, take the secondary and tertiary works that haven't been shown in 10 years, 15 years, that a lot of the curators and people know may never really see the light of day, or you've got better examples of the same work by the same artist someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
There are opportunities there to unlock some of that value. And so I don't know. That's my sort of hobby horse.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of these interesting conundrums as you think about, well, the cultural history that we want to support and who in this generation is to say what's of value and what's not, versus generations down the road that may need to discover amazing things that are sitting in the basements of these museums. But then my argument to that is just, well, who's making the argument about what we should be collecting right now, right? I mean,
That's true.
Under those rules, we should have huge warehouses where all cultural artifacts that are produced are simply go into a big storage area, which is kind of what I feel like the internet is.
Hey, that's an interesting perception.
Right? I mean, it's like, if anything, it's like all the images that everybody's taken of all of these artworks. That's what the internet is. It's like it's being stored in some server farm somewhere. So we should at least take credence in that.
Yeah.
So just let me just talk to our audience for a moment here.
Sure.
Everybody who's joined us, please, if you have questions for Eric, put them into the chat window, and I will throw them Eric's way and see what kind of insight he has. But I know I don't have the monopoly on the questions here or the insights. So by all means, let's I invite you to join us into this conversation. And Eric, while our fellow participants are thinking about what they may want to ask you, let me put one more thing to you. So
Sure.
we have a bunch of students who have just graduated. We have one cohort that finished up in December, another cohort that's finishing this May. What would your advice be to people just starting off into these fields, either wanting to be dealers, wanting to be gallerists, going to work for museums, for arts organizations, music organizations, schools, and so forth? How would you keep their spirits up if you were charged with having to do that? I'm sure you probably do it informally in many cases too. But what do you think there is the message that the sort of new entrants into the field need to hear right now in order to get through the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months?
Well, for one thing, I do think that roughly, who knows exactly how long, but in a while, the whole pandemic situation will be behind us. And I think getting through it, obviously, is going to be a bit of a challenge. But I'm guessing that the key is each one of those folks who are graduating in the fields that they're in, they took up the field in the first place because that's something they love, which I personally think is the best thing you can ever do, is to follow your heart and do what you really like to do. Obviously, a lot of people can't do that just for practical reasons. But I would just say, hang in there. I think there will be light at the end of the tunnel. I just don't know exactly when, but follow those paths into museums or wherever, arts institutions, etc., and learn as much as possible in a practical way in the roles that they are going to end up playing in those institutions.
What was a lesson as a new dealer, someone entering into the commercial world in the 1980s? What were some of the lessons that you learned quickly that you think still apply today, and that anybody who is thinking about going out into this landscape to work on the commercial side of the art field should and needs to know?
Okay, well, I have to tell you, one of the first lessons I learned was it's not just about what I like, it's what the buying public likes. If you're going to be in the commercial art gallery or commercial art business, that you have to keep in mind. So sometimes I remember having a show once. There was an artist I absolutely loved. And a lot of times it's a gamble no matter what. You just can't give in to the whole commercial impulse. I have to say that as a little bit of an aside. But I really love this artist, but the subject matter was appreciated by many folks, but they didn't want to live with it. She was an abstract expressionist painter, and the emotion connected with almost all of the paintings was kind of grim. And so people would say, gee whiz, I love it. It's very expressive, etc. It's just that I feel depressed. And in the morning, I wake up on Sunday. I don't want to wake up and feel like that. So there's going to be some of that. And what I actually would do, sometimes I would include those pieces, but I will also have other types of works that will be on display. So as a way, some of the pieces I thought would be more appealing would subsidize the pieces I wanted everybody to see that might not sell, I would kind of assume wouldn't sell. But I tell you what else, though. I've also seen where pieces I thought would sell wouldn't, and pieces I thought wouldn't sell would. So it's almost sometimes impossible to predict the buying behavior of a lot of clients. So I would put that out there, too, for anybody thinking about becoming an art dealer. So those are a couple of things that come immediately to mind that I learned pretty quick and early.
Did you? I'm sorry. I love these kind of Genesis stories because core to our programs is especially on the art business side, is an entrepreneurship sequence,
Yeah.
and we are very focused on, as you mentioned before, there's a creative side to every field, and for our standpoint, entrepreneurship is kind of the creative side of the business field, right? And so it offers an opportunity for our students to really exercise those ideas, and we are almost singularly focused on having them think about, well, what is it though that your audience or your market or your constituents want, right? I mean, there's what you think the art world needs, and then there's actually what it does need, and what a paying customer might actually want.
Yes.
And so you sometimes have to leave behind those sensibilities, and come up with something new. When you began, um, did you know that you had customers kind of ready to go, and you knew that there were people who were going to come to the gallery, and you knew that you had collectors, and you knew that you were going to be able to cover the overhead and the cost of what you were doing? Were you pretty confident there, or was it a gamble? Were you making a leap, and you didn't exactly know whether you were going to get the ends to meet, in that first 3 months, 6 months, 12 months?
Oh, for sure, it was a gamble. But before I opened the gallery, I did go around and talk to a lot of different gallery directors, gallery employees, and so forth. And most of them were very discouraging. So anybody out there who's interested in opening up a gallery, don't let me or any other gallery person
Discourage
discourage
you?
you. Well, gee whiz, you're kind of crazy. It's a crazy business. It's volatile. And many of those things are true. I mean, there's ups and downs and so forth, but that's true of any business, really. But in the art business, it may be a little bit more true. But I, I definitely felt like it was a gamble. People were telling me, and this was probably good advice, to basically set aside enough money as if you weren't going to make anything for at least 6 months. And so what I did too was I got a space that was very small. It was about 600 square feet, maybe a little bit less display space. And so the rent was more manageable. And so I tried to minimize the expenses and save up enough to cover for that period. Again, in the art business, it was funny because when I first opened up, there was this big, highly publicized case of a Beverly Hills gallery being raided by the FBI. And there it was on television. And it was only about that gallery, but at the same time, it reminded everybody, hey, listen, you got to be careful. There's some very unscrupulous dealers in the art business. And so that just kind of raised all these red flags and made people more cautious. And so, it was tough enough to build trust and confidence to begin with, but then when things like that make the 6 o'clock news, it makes it even more challenging. So anyway, I would just say it was definitely a gamble. And I tried to lessen the risk by starting with, and I was very fortunate, starting with an artist who had a reputation. That's the other thing I'll say. I'm personally, as an observer and a person who appreciates art, I really always are looking for the emerging artists. But as a commercial enterprise, emerging art is, I found anyway, in my experience, the toughest thing to sell. It's been my experience that most collectors are looking for what they've already been told they should collect, even if it's not an advisor directly advising them, but some curator who decided that they should have a show at some major museum. That actually is like a recommendation to collectors out there that maybe that's somebody they should look at in terms of what to collect. So emerging art is a tough sell. I used to do 2 emerging art shows. I used to do 8 shows a year, and then 2 of which were devoted only to emerging artists. Then I reduced it to 1. And then I started sprinkling them in with the group shows where the more established artists, and try to help generate interest in them as a kind of after effect of looking at the more experienced artists. And so it was a big challenge for that.
What was the relationship of what was your relationship to the broader, say, gallery scene in Los Angeles when you began, and what was the feeling amongst the artists that you're showing as well in terms of their relationship to their communities of artists? Did it feel as if they were sort of taking part in the larger context, or because of the challenges in race relations, particularly in Los Angeles at that moment, did it feel more of a kind of enclave or a smaller community that was looking out for itself?
I think when it comes to that, I think it was the latter. I think a lot of them felt that way. They were excluded. They felt, and not just from museums, but from the commercial galleries and some of the art reviews and stuff like that. they felt like they weren't, even if they were lucky enough to be a part of a show, they weren't feeling like the art critics were really paying attention, serious attention anyway. So there was all that.
Was there a moment when that began to shift? Was there something palpable, or was there some event or anything, or was it just kind of a gradual loosening up and transformation?
I saw it more as a gradual loosening up and transformation. That was my observation of it. It was more gradual.
Interesting.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
early on, I became a member of the California Art Dealers Association, because the first part of your question was about that with the other. And that they were very supportive. I mean, many of those my fellow art dealers that had nothing to do, some of them actually, like at the time, Heritage Gallery had represented Charles White and other Black American artists. And so they were very supportive and helpful, by the way, not just because of the fact they respected the Black art and that they showed them, but they were just very helpful and supportive just in general. And some of the other dealers too, who didn't have anything at all really at that time anyway to do with Black American art per se, they were very helpful and supportive. What
do you think has kept there from being other African American and dealers and galleries in the larger context? It's a phenomenon that I think we all recognize, that there just aren't as many black dealers specifically. I think that's beginning to change. We certainly have had students who've come through our program, African American students who've come through our program, who we've encouraged to go into the commercial arts sector, not just the institutional framework. But in your opinion, what are some of the things that have sort of held that back or kept it at bay?
I think some of the things that have just kept any person from entering the field, and that's just because it is a difficult business for one thing, and requires, I think, a relatively large amount of startup. You have to put aside some funds. As I mentioned before, I was advised to do that. That's actually, looking back on it, was excellent advice, and not everybody has the capital or even the inclination to take that amount of risk. So you're basically rolling the dice to see whether it takes off or not, and you're willing to use that money to gamble in that direction. So I believe that's one of the main things.
But you did.
I did, yeah. And there's others too. There's others I know who did the same thing. Black art gallery gallerists in like Oakland, for instance. There's Thelma Harris there, and then others as well. So yeah, I'm not trying to discourage anybody from that, but I just say I think that was one of the big obstacles. It's just that kind of gamble aspect.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's always a gamble because there's nothing easy about it. I mean, my hope for a couple generations now of artists that even now I think either don't consider themselves just Black artists, but major artists in their own right. And the visibility that they have in major museums and from curators, and the presence of some curators themselves of color are creating opportunities, I hope, at the commercial level, right? I mean, I think that they've relied on the kind of institutional framework to create this visibility and create these representations to begin with. But we have, part of our program is very much focused on the commercial art field, and that's one place where we'd like to see greater representation and greater activity on the part of these artists and the part of these dealers.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that's such a big boost. So you make a good point. I mean, if an artist is featured at, say, Museum of Modern Art in New York, or MoCA here in LA, or whatever, wherever those major museums are, I mean, that's could be a huge boost for the commercial side of it. No question.
Yeah. And I'm still, and I've been saying this now for maybe 5-10 years, as soon as Glenn Lowry steps down at the Museum of Modern Art, I think Thelma Golden is getting ready to step in, and that'll be a great thing for that institution all around.
Oh yeah, right.
That's good. So I'm gonna ask you to just a couple questions on sort of future prospects.
Okay.
If there's one thing missing from the art and cultural landscape of Los Angeles in particular, what do you think it is?
Oh, that's a good question. One good thing missing, huh?
Yeah. What's missing from LA arts and culture that it needs, that may be present elsewhere in other cities, or just that you found that you think is it could do with?
Gosh, that's tough. Because I'm thinking, because see, the thing about Los Angeles, I think that makes it different than say New York is not just the history of it, but the layout. So with LA, everything's all spread out. I used to have this happen when I would give receptions at my Santa Monica gallery space. People living in LA itself sometimes would not come, not because they didn't want to come per se, but just because the traffic situation was so discouraging. And so I think what's missing is this intimacy and proximity. And I'm not sure how to correct that situation, but I know that was something that impeded my, at least like I said, my receptions and so forth. People would pick times to come and make appointments to come when it wasn't so difficult to get there. So that I guess that's one thing. It's probably not anything anybody can do about, but I guess that's just related to the geographical layout.
Yeah, it's one thing that I lived in New York for 20 years before moving to Los Angeles pretty recently. I'm a recent transplant, so I'm still a tourist and a spectator. Um, but there is no spontaneity in LA. I mean, there might be in terms of you're going to hop in your car and you're going to go to the mountains to go for a hike or something like that, but there's no spontaneity when it comes to the art and cultural field, right? If there is an opening or a talk or an event or an exhibition that you want to see, in general, these things are planned out pretty well in advance.
Oh yeah. Oh no, absolutely, absolutely. Because you got to then figure out parking situation and allow for the
That's right.
inevitable freeway traffic jams and so
That's
forth.
right. That's right. And and maybe that's one thing um, that the current pandemic will open back up is there'll be a lot more working from home. There'll be a lot more distributed labor in general across all fields, and so the traffic may just die down a little bit, or we may even become more focused on a kind of regional sensibility. Although in LA that could just become like factionalism, where you just be dedicated to Santa Monica, and you never step foot in Highland Park.
Right,
Right?
right,
Pasadena will become its autonomous zone.
right, right, right. I kind of think it's kind of de facto that way before the virus.
I think that's right. I think it kind of is, but it may become more so that way.
Yeah.
Um, do you? One of the things that I've found since moving here, and I'm curious to get your opinion on it too, is that there is more of a sense of encouragement and a sense of collaboration amongst the people that are involved in the arts and cultural fields in Los Angeles than I think that there are, particularly in places like New York and even in some European capitals. Have you found that to be the case as well?
Yes, I've definitely noticed that amongst the artists and also amongst the dealers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's another, apart from the geography, and maybe it's a function or a symptom of the geography, but that's one of the things that distinguishes let's say the LA sensibility, is that there is a genuine, um, let's say, a hearing out and a willingness to get involved in multiple different projects with multiple different partners. I think exactly because of this reason, you can't really carve out your own audience and expect to be able to make ends meet or to meet your mission if you don't have a broader reach or a broader extension.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Yep.
Well, listen, Eric, this has been fantastic. It's great pleasure finally meeting you. I know our another colleague of ours who has a long history with the LA County Arts Commission, Laura Zucker, had been trying to get us in touch. So a big shout out to Laura for doing that.
Yeah.
And I wish you all the best for the whatever remains of this pandemic, and then whatever the future holds.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, and thank you to Laura too. It's been a while since I've spoken with her, but she was fantastic. I had the pleasure of being on the commission during part of her last part of her tenure as the executive director.
That's right. She's a force. She's another faculty member in our program. She was involved and directed the arts management program for a long time. Really responsible for building it into the program that we have today, and we're pleased. The network in LA continues to grow, and the spirit of collaboration is alive.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, she's awesome. So I will continue. I will also sing her praises.
Good. All right. You take care, and
Hey, thank you.
I look forward to the next time.
Same here. Thank you again. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.
Take care.